All right, today we are continuing our biography series, and I want to look at Matthew chapter 5. This is a section where Jesus is teaching the Sermon on the Mount, the greatest teaching ever. And I want to begin in verse 38. Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." And today's Father's Day, and so we wanted to commemorate today by talking about 2 things, or celebrating 2 things that make dads happy. Number 1, baseball, and number 2, bacon. That's why we tried to find some way. I know on Mother's Day, sometimes we pass out roses or chocolate, but on Father's Day, when I asked our team, what do we need to pass out to the dads at Messiah? They said, we should pass out bacon. But it's a little weird. How exactly do you pass out bacon? Normally, you have to have eggs with it as well. But we talked about that way. And then we came across Vincent Van Donuts. And they make an amazing maple glazed bacon donut. And so dads, granddads, that's what we passed out to you today. And if you didn't get one because you're dieting, come on, man. I mean, seriously, it's like the most luxurious, dad-friendly donut ever. But like I said, our other topic for today is baseball. And we're looking at the biography of Jackie Robinson. Now, yesterday, June 19th, marked a holiday that originated in Galveston, Texas. Now, I grew up just outside Galveston, Texas in Houston, and used to go there all the time to go to the beach or to go fishing on the coast. June 19th, 1865, which is also called Juneteenth, marked the day that General Granger went to Union forces and proclaimed the end of slavery in Texas. Now, Abraham Lincoln delivered the Emancipation Proclamation 2 years prior, but not everyone had felt its full effect. Now, Juneteenth marked that finally coming to fruition, and then the 13th Amendment, which banned slavery, followed later that year in December. And Texas, my home state, was the first state to recognize Juneteenth as a paid state holiday. But now 47 of our 50 states also do that. But we know it's one thing for something to be legal or illegal, and it's quite another for it to have a real effect on society. It's one thing to have a rule about something, it's quite another to actually change the hearts of people. So today in biography, I want to look at the life of Jackie Robinson. And as many of you know, Jackie's number 42 is retired by every team in Major League Baseball. But it comes out of retirement on April 15th, and it's then worn by every team to commemorate Jackie's birthday, and also breaking the color barrier in baseball. But Jackie Robinson was not the first African-American player to play in Major League Baseball. Fleet Walker in 1884 was the catcher for the Toledo Blue Stockings. And his brother also played center field for that team. Now, he was cut by the team at the end of the season, and then went into the minors. And at that time, the International League of Minor League Baseball voted to ban the signings of any new black players. And the guy who kicked this off was Cap Anson, who was the manager of what would later become the Chicago Cubs. And he refused to play if any black players played in the game. And so they were all benched during that game so baseball could go on. This ban became baseball's unwritten rule. And in 1889, Fleet Walker's last in the minor leagues, it was the last time that a black player played in baseball until 1946, when Jackie Robinson became a minor league player for the Brooklyn Dodgers in Montreal, and then in 1947 was brought up to the majors and he played for the Dodgers. My college pastor tells a story about those early days when he was playing for the Brooklyn Dodgers, and they played a game in Cincinnati. And in Cincinnati that day, the racial slurs that came down from the stands were terrible. People were throwing things on the field. Just so many terrible things said and directed at Jackie Robinson. And it got so bad at one point that the Brooklyn Dodgers starting shortstop, Pee Wee Reese, he went over to Jackie and put his arm around him and just stared at the stands of fans. Now, the thing about Pee Wee Reese is in Cincinnati, he was a local hero because he grew up just across the border in northern Kentucky. And as Pee Wee Reese stood there with his arm around Jackie Robinson, staring up at the stands, the crowd slowly stopped their boos. Because it's one thing to boo Jackie Robinson, but what happens when you boo him and it means you're also booing Pee Wee Reese, your hero? You can't do that. So here's the thing. Pee Wee Reese once said to Jackie Robinson, who became his friend, he said to him, "You know, Jackie, maybe one day we'll all wear 42. And then nobody will be able to tell us apart." And now in Major League Baseball, they do. They do. Babe Ruth's number isn't retired by every team. There's a lot of great baseball players whose numbers are not retired by every team. Jackie's number is. But here's the question of the day. How do you not lash out at people who hate you, even though they don't even know you? How do you keep from lashing out? That hate comes from nowhere. They're just judging the book by its cover. So where do you find the strength to not lash out? Well, one of the places you can turn is the Sermon on the Mount. Because then in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus likes to start with a phrase like this: "You have heard that it was said, but now I tell you." You have heard that it was said. Maybe it's in the Old Testament. Maybe it's from your Jewish rabbi or a Pharisee teacher. You've heard that it was said such and such. But now I tell you, Jesus is claiming his own authority. His own authority. He is calling the world forward. Because Jesus knew something. He knew that the 10 Commandments could keep us in line, but they wouldn't make us good. They could keep us in line, but they wouldn't make us good. They just try to keep you reasonable. See, we debate in our country of whether or not the 10 Commandments should be in courtrooms. And I would say that's a very low bar. The 10 Commandments just ask you to not murder and not steal. Jesus wants something far better for you than the 10 Commandments. When Jesus says that he's come to fulfill the law, he's pulling us forward from that law to the gospel. Because it's one thing to not murder somebody, but it's quite another to try not even to lash out in anger, or better yet, to actually befriend somebody, or to love somebody, to reconcile the relationship. I mean, Jesus says, of course, don't commit adultery, but how about not lusting at all? See, the law just wants to keep you from cheating and divorcing. It tries to keep you in check. The gospel wants you to not objectify anybody. The gospel wants you to adore your spouse. Not cheating on your spouse is a very low bar that the Ten Commandments sets. Jesus actually wants you to be in love with your spouse. See, this does way more for a family. It does way more for the next generation. And it's in the midst of this teaching that Jesus comes to an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Eugene Peterson, the guy who translated the Message Bible, the translator of the Message Bible, Eugene Peterson tells a personal story of when he was growing up. He was in a Christian home and he had good parents. And his parents made him memorize verses like, bless those who persecute you, or turn the other cheek. But those Bible verses did not help him from a bully at school named Garrison Johns. Day after day, every day, Garrison Johns would pick on him and bully him. And it's hard to remember your mom's words. It's hard to remember the Bible's verses. It's hard to pray for a bully when they're picking on you. And suddenly one day he snapped. To his surprise, when he grabbed Garrison Johns by the neck, he was stronger than him. And so he knocked him to the ground and pinned him to the ground with his knees and punched him in the face. And that sure felt good. So then he punched him again. And then the crowd of his friends around him began to cheer and to begin to cheer. And when the first blood burst from the nose of the bully, Eugene knew that he had the bully beaten. He started to tell him, cry uncle, say uncle, just say uncle. But Garrison Johns refused to do it. And then suddenly Eugene Peterson's Christian upbringing came back to him. And he said to the bully, well then say, I believe in Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And he did. And then Eugene Peterson writes, Garrison Johns became my first convert. My first convert. Well, Jesus, when he's teaching on, you have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth, he teaches us even a better way, how to love your enemies. You see, before the law of Moses, which was eye for eye, tooth for tooth, it wasn't uncommon for retaliation to escalate, for somebody to wrong you, and so you would go and wrong them back, but you would do more. And then in retaliation, they would come back to you and they would take it even further. It seemed like revenge always escalates. And Moses knew this, and so he's teaching people that it's important that when you get revenge, only eye for eye, only tooth for tooth. That's important. And we can acknowledge in some ways that how is this law helpful in society? How is it useful in society? But also, I think as Christians, we recognize this law is also incomplete. It's important to stop revenge from escalating. But it's also a really low bar. It's a very incomplete ask. And Jesus is teaching us something very profound here. Not that you can't defend yourself or your family or your country, because sometimes, I know, fighting bad guys can lead to freedom. But Jesus says, what if you expand your imagination? See, it's one thing to try to save yourself, but it's quite another if you want to save the bad guy. What if it was possible not just to save yourself, but to save him too? Now, is Jesus saying that a black eye can stop a bad guy some of the time, but it can't change him? Yeah. The only thing that can change him is love, divine love. It's the only thing that can change the heart. You can restrain the bully, but how do you change his heart? And that's why I like to say, true love hurts. True love hurts. True love hurts sin right in its tracks. True love hurts death. It holds it back. True love hurts loneliness. It makes sure that nobody's ever alone. True love hurts revenge. True love hurts anger. It's Jesus on the cross telling the Father to forgive them. Why is he forgiving the soldiers? They're torturing him. Because Jesus doesn't want to beat the bad guy. He wants to transform the bad guy. Jesus doesn't see an enemy. He sees a potential friend. See, that's what true love does. True love hurts the devil's work to mess up our lives. And when we take anger and revenge, we take those away, we take away the devil's power in our lives. And so Jesus' greatest teaching comes later on in John 13, where he says, "A new command I give you." You've heard it was said, lots of stuff. Here's the new command: love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Do you want to know Jesus' greatest evangelism strategy? Love one another, and then people will know that you are my disciples. You want to witness your faith to your neighbor? You want to witness your faith to an unbelieving friend? Love one another. Then they will see your faith. Then they will see your faith. Do you have a kid or a grandkid who hasn't been churched in a long time and they're not sure what to believe about the faith and you don't know what to tell them? They don't need a sermon from you. They don't need a Bible study from you. You don't have to spend time in endless hours of prayer, although those are all good things. The thing they need to see is that you love one another. And when you do that, they will see that you are followers of Jesus. Oh, if the church would take this teaching, the whole world would change. See, the world has always had different rules, and Jesus is giving us this new command. The original command was kind of an iron rule. Think back in the time of the Iron Age. In the Iron Age. What was the iron rule? Do unto others before they do to you. This is a preemptive strike. The iron rule is protect yourself before you even need protecting. And Moses comes along and says, no, that's too much. Let's take the silver rule. Do unto others as they do to you. So if they take your eye, you can take their eye. I just want to limit revenge. If they take your tooth, you can take their tooth, but nothing more. Let's just limit revenge. And then, of course, Jesus, we see this in the New Testament. There's this teaching, and he's asking one of the Pharisees who's questioning him. He says, what is it that the law teaches you? And the man says, well, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. We call that the golden rule. But for Jesus, that wasn't even enough. Because it's one thing to love others as you would have them do to you, but what if you could love others as they would have them do unto themselves? What if you could love others that way? That's kind of a platinum rule. But Jesus' ultimate command is the titanium rule, which he's teaching his disciples and which is the greatest teaching of the church to learn. As Jesus loves you, so you love others. It's one thing to not let revenge escalate, and it's one thing to love people the way you want to be loved. It's quite another to love people the way they want to be loved. But what if you could love people the way God loves you? What if you could have that much forgiveness? What if you could have that much grace? Jesus believes, man, when the church can do this, we can change the world. Gandhi, a lot of people don't know this, but Gandhi during World War II actually wrote a couple letters to Adolf Hitler. They're called the Dear Friend letters because he started off the letters by saying, my dear friend, Adolf Hitler. And then he talked to him about all the violence that's in the world. And then he asked him, he said, if you would just lay down your arms and get rid of the aggression, the whole world will be better. And Gandhi said, I know what it's like. I know what it's like to be in a time where your country's occupied by an opposing force. And he explained to him why he stood up against Great Britain back when he was in India. But he said the only way to really do it is to do it with peace, not with violence. And then he finishes the letter with a lot of pleasantries and told him that he loves him And he finished by saying, your dear friend, Gandhi. Wrote him a second letter like that. And unfortunately for all of us, Hitler maybe never got the letters, or he certainly didn't care about them. How different would the world be if he had actually listened to that advice? You know, Jesus, in this teaching that we looked at today from our gospel lesson, says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Go with them 2 miles. You see, at that time, Jewish people was being occupied. They were being occupied by the Romans, and the Roman soldiers would frequently draft individuals and on impulse force you to carry their load, force you to carry their bags and their stuff. This was your duty as a part of society to help the country, to help the government, to help the soldiers by going with them 1 mile and carrying it. And so it was typical for the Roman soldiers to request this of people. This is your way of supporting the troops. Well, the Jewish people really resented this treatment. It emphasized that their country was under Roman rule, and they believed God had given them this country, and that the Romans were going against God. And so many zealous Jews refused to carry the packs for the Roman soldiers. And of course, this resulted in conflict and sometimes severe punishment for the Jewish people. Well, Jesus comes along, and he encourages his followers to take a very different course of action. Rather than rebel against this treatment, Jesus advised his listeners to take the opposite approach, which was not just to carry the load the 1 mile legally required, but to carry it another mile just because you want to. You had to go the 1 mile, that was the rule. But now I want you to go the 2nd mile because of love. Just pure grace. Just pure grace. Jesus believed this would be far more effective in getting rid of the violence and the aggression in the world than taking offense. And I like to say that Jesus' crucifixion is the ultimate extra mile of love. Extra mile love is what our salvation is built on. And the extra mile Christian life loves enemies and turns them into friends. The extra mile Christian life loves enemies and turns them into their friends. And so another question for you: who in your life needs you to go an extra mile for them? If you could consider this question today, if you could answer this question, who in your life needs you to go an extra mile for them, then you got everything you needed to get from church today. Who in your life needs you to go an extra mile for them? Of all the black baseball players who could have broken the color barrier in baseball, why did Branch Rickey, the president of the Dodgers, why did Branch Rickey choose Jackie Robinson? Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige were the best players in the Negro Leagues at that time. Satchel Paige was the best pitcher, Josh Gibson was the best hitter, and many said at the time that they were the best players in baseball, period. And I happen to agree. Looking back at that time, Satchel Paige was the best pitcher in baseball, period. And when he was finally let in the major leagues, he pitched late into his 50s. He was amazing. So why did the president of the Brooklyn Dodgers choose Jackie Robinson? I'll tell you why. His faith. He chose him because of his faith. He chose him because Jackie Robinson was a devout Christian. He was a teetotaling Christian. And he knew he needed that kind of person. You see, Branch Rickey himself was a Bible-thumping Methodist. And he credits his own faith with the conviction to demand the integration of baseball. At the center of baseball's civil rights struggle were 2 men of great Christian faith. Now, was Jackie a great athlete? Absolutely. When he was at UCLA, everybody said that he was even better at basketball and football. And yet he made the Baseball Hall of Fame. His brother Mac won the silver medal in the '36 Berlin Olympics, narrowly being beaten out by Jesse Owens, who won the gold. That's Jackie's brother won the silver medal. So yeah, Jackie was a good athlete, but he was picked because of his faith, a faith that his mother made him live out. Jackie's family once had a cross burned in his yard. And even as a little kid, he was constantly facing racial slurs from his neighbors. Once in retaliation, he and his friends spread tar over a white neighbor's lawn. Besides, they had done it to him, so he did the same thing back to them. When his mom found out, she was furious. She demanded that Jackie repair the damage, and she supervised the repairs the whole time because she believed what the Bible taught. And the Bible taught that Christians were to bless those who persecute them, to bless the people that persecute them. When Jackie was called for the first time to Branch Ricky's office, Ricky's assistant took him to the elevator, and he had to pay off the elevator boy because the elevator in that building said whites only. When they walked into the office, the assistant said the air was electric. The two men just stood there and stared at each other, silent for a while. And then Mr. Ricky explained, I know you're a good ball player, but I'm looking for a good ball player who also has guts not to fight back. I need you to have guts that you won't fight back. And if you can do that, you will open the door for all other black players. Ricky then at the end brought out a copy of a book, and it was entitled The Life of Christ by Giovanni Papini. And he flipped to a passage that Papini calls the most stupefying of revolutionary teachings. And he read it to him. Ye have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But now I tell you. You know, when I picked this passage for today, I didn't know that story. It just seemed like the right teaching. It just seemed like the right thing to emphasize when remembering the biography of Jackie Robinson. I didn't know how pivotal this teaching was for Branch Rickey and for Jackie and their relationship. And the passage he read ended with these words: if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. And then the two Christians shook hands. So how do you respond to so much hatred and slurs and death threats? How do you keep your cool when it seems impossible? Jackie and Mr. Ricky believed that what he would face would be humanly impossible not to react. But they also believed that with God, all things are possible. God would give them the strength. And everybody in America has heard the story of Jackie Robinson, but have they heard the real story? The power behind the story, the faith behind the story. And this is the critical question that I think if all Christians could answer well, the world would change. What does love require of me when I face injustice in the world? What does love require of me when people do injustices against me? What does love require of me? When you answer that question, I want you to think about the cross. The greatest one ever to live gave his life up as a sacrifice. They spent all day mocking him and torturing him, and all he did all day was pray for them and forgive them. What does love require of me? Think to the cross. And then darkness fell over the land, and his friends scattered, and death thought it had won. But heaven just started counting to 3. Friday, Saturday, and then Easter Sunday. And he rose. That's the power over evil. That's extra mile Christian life. That's who Jesus calls us to be. How did Jesus defeat evil? He turned the other cheek. He went the extra mile. He took up his cross and he loved his enemies and he made them his friends. And we are so blessed that he did. That's Christianity. If you want to reject Christianity, don't do it based on the historicity, because I'm going to tell you the resurrection stands up to history. It stands up to history. If you want to reject Christianity, reject this teaching that you don't want to love your enemies and you don't want to love your neighbor and you want to live a selfish life, because then you're being honest. Reject Christianity because you reject what Jesus stands for, and Jesus stands for love. That's who we are in Messiah. That's who we got to be. That's who we got to be.